welcome everyone to the first session of this author support session for the Journal of Open Humanities data. Thank you so much for joining us from different parts of the world. This is the first of two sessions that we're doing today. So now it's the morning in the UK and Europe, and we're going to have one in the afternoon for people in different time zones. So I am Barbara McGillivray, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Open Humanities Data. And I am going to say a few words about the journal, introduce this event, and then I'm going to hand over to Dr. Irene Pagliai, who was a JOHD author, but has joined the team as an associate editor. So thank you, Irene, for accepting our invitation, and we look forward to hearing from you and from your experience as an author. And then there's going to be time for a Q&A. So hopefully this will be a chance to address any doubts, any hesitations people have. We know from experience that publishing a data paper or writing a data paper isn't something that is a sort of intuitive concept for most researchers. It's quite a new concept still, particularly in the humanities. So we wanted to take this opportunity to really address questions that people may feel stopping them from being ready to write a data paper or a paper for JOHD. So I am going to share my screen and show you the journal's website and take that as an opportunity to tell you a little bit about the journal. So the Journal of Open Humanities Data launched in 2015 and is published by Ubiquity Press, which is a small publisher which has been acquired by De Gruyter. At the time, it was just Ubiquity Press journal, and the idea was that JOHD was part of a set of journals that would publish non-traditional outputs. So Ubiquity Press publishes a few data journals in other disciplines, and this one was specifically dedicated to humanities. Since 2015, the journal has grown rapidly, particularly, I must say, since 2019, when I took over as editor-in-chief, because I really put a lot of effort into growing the journal, the team, and also really speaking about the concept of data papers to the whole community, and sort of being part of a movement of sort of knowledge sharing, and sort of sharing the idea of data publications in the humanities. The journal is a data journal, so the idea is that we publish papers about data sets, but we also publish broader narratives that we call discussion papers. So if you go in the About page of the journal, you'll see that we publish two types of papers. So data papers is the classic output that we started with. So these are short descriptions of objects. We'll hear more about this in the rest of the event, but some very structured narratives that describe a data set. And then discussion papers is a typology of papers that we introduced a bit later to address the fact that sometimes there is space, you need space to discuss broader issues around data in the humanities, whether it's access, infrastructure, analysis, bias, and so on. So that's why we introduced this other typology paper. I won't say too much about this because you will hear from Irene, but I would like to mention that we've also published a series of special collections. These are thematic collections of papers around specific topics or subdisciplines in the humanities. So at the moment, we have a special collection on data rescue and safeguarding, and we've actually extended the deadline for submissions. So if you're interested in this, please have a look. The submission will be late September or early October, and we'll update the page accordingly. We also have one on languages of Ireland and Britain, and we had various special collections on various different topics. So I invite you to have a look, because it's likely that collection will sort of catch your interest. And equally, we always welcome suggestions for new topics or special collections. So feel free to contact me with ideas. We're also active on social media, and I'll say a few words more about that later. What else? I think the most important part of this event will be hearing from an author, Irene, and listening to your questions and addressing them. So I'm going to stop here with my brief introduction, and I'm going to hand over to Irene. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Barbara. So, hi everyone. Good morning, or well, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Today's talk, the title that I gave is Bridging the Gap Between Your Data's Past and Its Future Reuse, because I think that publishing a data paper, or well, a discussion paper with JOHD is an excellent strategy to really bridge, well, the gap between the history, the story, well, behind your data and their future reuse, right? So how this might be useful for the general research community. So without hesitation, let's start. So this is the menu for today. We will start, of course, with getting to know each other a little better. So I will say a few words about me and what I have published with JOHD. And then I have decided to structure this talk in 3 different sections. So before JOHD, during JOHD, and after JOHD. So the idea is really to guide you step by step through the publication pipeline, relying also on my experience as an author when this can be useful for making this whole conversation a bit more concrete. So who am I? I work as a postdoctoral researcher at the Technical University of Braunschweig in Germany. My background is in linguistics, and my research focus is specifically on figurative language, in particular idioms. So you might be familiar with this, multi-word expressions with the figurative meaning, so stuff like break the ice, break a leg, spill the beans, and so on and so forth. More general, my research interests lie somewhere between lexical semantics, psycholinguistics, and computational linguistics. This is the discussion paper that I have published with JOHD, and you see there is Bridging the Gap. So yeah, the reference to the title of this talk is not random. And with JOHD, I have talked about the creation of a lexical resource which comprises 150 pairs of English and Italian idioms that share similar meanings in the 2 languages. So yeah, 150 pairs of cross-linguistic idioms. In the data set, I have annotated these pairs for different levels of translatability, which essentially refers to whether the idioms in the 2 languages have or not the same words, right? So I have 50 pairs with exactly the same words between Italian and English, then 50 with just partially the same words, and then another 50 pairs with completely different words in the 2 languages. Then I have also included information with respect to syntactic structure. And in the dataset, idioms have been normed. What does this mean? Well, in this case, it means that I have hired native speakers of English and Italian, and essentially I've asked them, can you please rate from 1 to 5, so ordinal data, this idiom with respect to this variable. And I have selected a sample of psycholinguistic variables I was interested in for my doctoral research. So for example, how familiar is this idiom to you? How transparent do you think that the figurative meaning of this idiom is? And then I have collected all the ratings. It's a lot of data. The complete data set contains, of course, 1 row per idiom and participant combination, right? So this resulted in 8,550 rows of raw data. So you can imagine this is not very friendly to just make sense of at a glance, right? And I wanted to also offer some more descriptive overview of the data, which is why I also provide monolingual overviews and cross-linguistic overviews. What does this mean? Well, it means that for the monolingual overviews, I have two different files, one for English and one for Italian, because maybe people are interested only in one language. And in this case, I have aggregated participant ratings, so that now every idiom is associated to a mean and standard deviation value, right? So it's like you have an ID sheet of every single idiom that I have in the dataset. Then for the cross-linguistic overview files, I have three different files, one file for each translatability category. I show the same idiom level summary statistics, but in this case, I show the English idiom next to the Italian idiom within each pair, right? So that people can just really compare at a glance how the English speakers rated that idiom with respect to all the variable and compare that with the, well, relative Italian idiom. Okay, so this was just to give you an overview, an idea of what kind of data I was working with when I published with JOHD. And I have completed this data set in late winter 2023. I was a second year PhD student, and essentially I had just spent over a year of my PhD creating this resource. And like, it was a lot of data. I felt it was an interesting research output, right? But it felt frustrating at times because there was this dissonance between what I had just done, the time that I had invested in creating this resource, and the perception that this was not a pure research output in a way, right? And I think this stems from a very utilitarian view of the data, because normally we collect data, well, for answering something, some other question, right? It's like data is not worth a publication per se because it's not research output. So I was very frustrated. Then something very nice happened one day of early spring, I believe. I found JOHD's call for papers on LinguistList from someone named Barbara McGillivray. And actually, I went to look into the archives of LinguistList, and I found the original message, which is 31st of March, yes. And I have copied that here. And you see, I have highlighted some keywords that really captured my attention. So the Journal of Open Humanities Data features peer-reviewed publications describing humanities research objects with high potential for reuse. And I was like, okay, this might be very relevant for me because it's about data. It's a publication about data. These might include annotated corpora, ontologies, lexicons, which was my case, but also databases, maps, atlases, and so on and so forth. And these can be created with qualitative, quantitative, or computational methods. And I was like, okay, you've sold this to me. Tell me more. But then I also read JOHD provides immediate open access to its content. And this was crucial for me because I was doing my PhD as a part of a research group, which was funded by the German Research Foundation. And it was compulsory, mandatory for us to release every possible research output in open access. So this was crucial for me. So clearly I became curious and I went to check the journal's website. So let's start the during JOHD phase. Barbara already talked about this briefly, so let's take a closer look. The first thing that you will find out when you are in the website is that JOHD accepts two different types of submissions. So on the one hand, data papers, and on the other hand, discussion papers. Data papers are quite short, concise papers, maximum 1,500 words, and they are highly structured. So essentially, JOHD provides you with a template with some sections. We will see them better in the next slide, and you must follow this structure. Discussion papers, in contrast, are broader narrations, illustrating methods, challenges, and limitations. In general, I would say, in methodological discussions within the humanities. So these are longer papers. They can be up to 5,000 words. And JOHD provides a template as well, but you have more flexibility here. So let's take a closer look at data papers. These are the sections that must be in your data paper in this order. So the first is the overview, meaning where is your dataset? In what is the repository that is hosting your data? And in what context have you created your dataset? Tell us something about your research area, right? The second is the methodology that has been followed to create the dataset, starting from data collection up until data quality control. Then, of course, the description of the dataset. So again, the repository name, what kind of files are in the dataset, what versions of a software maybe you have used, what languages and what license, and so on and so forth. So really make sure that the description of your dataset is clear and accessible. And finally, the special thing of JOHD, I believe, is that it has an eye to the future, right? So it wants to know about the reuse potential of your dataset. How do you think that your data can be useful for the research community? So I think, to summarize, that writing a data paper essentially means to answer these questions. What is your dataset exactly? What is this about? Where is your dataset in the World Wide Web? And how have you created your dataset? But also, how is your dataset going to be reused by the community? Moving on to discussion papers, this is the structure that is suggested by JOHD, but again, this is not a rigid structure. You have room for adapting this, but of course you want to start with a general introduction, right? So something like context and motivation for your discussion. And then if you are talking about a specific data set, doesn't have to be the case, but if you are, describe the data set, of course, and the method. So how have you created this data set? But it can also be just a general discussion on approaches in your research or methodologies used. Maybe it can be a meta-analysis of different methodologies. So you really have freedom of choosing in this case. And then if this applies to you, you may have a section for presenting your results and discussion about the results. And again, JOHD wants you to have an eye to the future, right? So you're also invited to have a section for implications and applications. So I believe that for discussion papers, of course, you are supposed to answer the same questions as for data papers, or what, where, how, but also you have more space for talking about why. Why do you think that this discussion is necessary in your field? And in my case, I have decided to write a discussion paper. So I had the data set, right? But I really wanted to tell the story behind the data set. I wanted to say, why have I decided to treat my variables the way I have treated them? I wanted to report the challenges about crowdsourcing because I have collected all of the data online. So I really just wanted more space and freedom to tell the story of my data set. So we have seen one very important distinction between data paper and discussion paper, but another very important aspect of publishing a data paper with JOHD is choosing the repository, right? And as you can see from this nice picture, it's something that you are supposed to do quite early in the publication pipeline, right? It's the second step. So you have to decide what's going to be the home of your data. If you're lost, don't worry. JOHD is very nice. On the website, you can find a list of recommended repositories. So you can start from here. But in general, I recommend that you ask yourself some questions when you have to decide where you want to publish your data. First one is this going to be the right home for my data? Meaning, try to choose a discipline-specific repository, right? So you don't want to publish, I don't know, your archaeology data in a repository that is packed with psychology data, right? Second question is, will my data remain available? So don't go for unknown repositories, go for trusted repositories with a clear sustainability model so that you know that they will be supported over time. Third, will this repository make my data citable? Meaning you want the repository to give your data a persistent identifier like a JOHD or a handle so that people can cite your data. And finally, does this repository support future reuse? So ideally, the repository has to allow open access and provide an appropriate reuse license, but also allow you to have rich metadata and a clear documentation so that people can make sense of what they are looking on the screen, but also so that your data is easier to find online. So to make this a bit more concrete, I can show you my example. This is essentially the welcome page on the Göttingen Research Online Data Repository, which is where I have published my data because I was doing my PhD at the University of Göttingen, and I didn't really have a choice when it came to the repository because the university required all the researchers to publish their research outputs in their, well, native repository, right? So another piece of advice that I can give you is always double check with your institution whether there are some explicit expectations, right? Because honestly, I had spent already quite some time doing research on repositories. Okay, so where am I? Am I going to publish my data set? Only to find out in a second moment that actually I didn't have a choice, right? So always talk to the people in your institution. So as you can see, the dataset has a JOHD so that people can cite this. Then there is a section for providing an ID of the dataset, essentially, with a very brief description, a very broad subject, so arts and humanities, and some keywords to describe what the dataset is about. Of course, this section helps people to immediately understand what they're dealing with, but also makes your data easier to find online. Then very important, there is the related publication on JOHD. So the reference to the publication, of course, has been added in a second moment once the paper has been published on JOHD. And ideally, you want your paper to direct to the dataset, but also the dataset to direct to your paper. So it really needs to be circular. And finally, the license that I have decided to apply to my data. This license essentially means that everyone can access and also modify the data if they want with a new version, but they have to provide essentially provide the information with respect to the fact that I am the author of this data, right? And then NC stands for non-commercial, so this data cannot be used for commercial purposes. So then let's move on to the structure of the files within the dataset. The first important component, and this is really the main door, the main entrance to your dataset, is the README file. So ideally, the people that want to know more about your data, first thing that they will do is read the README. And once they have read the README file, they will know for sure where to go next based on their interests. So in the README file, you have to describe the overview of the files that you have in the data and also what is inside every single file. The raw data set, every single data point that I have collected from the native speakers, then the overviews that I have mentioned. I also provide demographic information, of course, everything anonymized of the participants, because, well, exploring the relationship between demographic data and the ratings that I have collected is something that I've not done, but maybe some researchers will be interested in doing this, right? So I have also provided this type of data. Then you have an R script with the statistical code that I have used to measure the reliability of my ratings. And then for the sake of really completeness and transparency, I also have screenshots essentially of the data collection. So for example, the consent form and the examples of ratings. I really wanted to show what the participants had seen during the experiment, essentially. So as you can see, there is a clear folder hierarchy, and the first part is the README file. The naming of the folders and the files is consistent and self-explanatory. You don't want people to try and guess what's inside a file, right? So your name needs to be very transparent, and all data is provided in open and non-proprietary formats so that we can go beyond potential limitations connected to softwares. One very practical aspect, how long does it take to publish a journal with JOHD? Well, it was super fast. I have submitted the paper at the end of July, and essentially 3 months, yes, 3 months later, my paper was out. So everything was very fast, very smooth, and communication has always been very clear and supportive. So that's one extra reason to publish with JOHD. So final section after JOHD. Why do I believe that it's important to publish data papers, and what is this process going to leave you as a researcher? First of all, something that I cannot stress enough, especially in the humanities, data do not simply exist waiting to be found, right? Our data, they're shaped by consequential choices. So what do I decide to collect? How am I going to collect this? What do I consider to be data, and what do I consider not to be data? So the example that I prefer usually is the ranking of countries by happiness. Usually it's always Finland, and I'm very happy if Finnish people are the happiest. Like, don't get me wrong, but essentially what you decide to be a proxy for happiness, it matters, right? So what are you going to consider? Average hours of sun, food quality, infrastructure, welfare, well, plenty of options, right? But the process that is behind the selection of the data should be transparent, right? And normally in standard research articles, you don't really have enough space to say details about the methodology, because usually it's the section that gets squeezed the first. And I think that telling the story of your data has twofold benefit. First of all, it aligns your work with contemporary research practice. I think it's harder and harder in 2026 to justify having to send emails to someone because you are interested in their data. Maybe they're relevant for your work, but maybe this email will never ever receive an answer, right? So we can be more contemporary researchers. And this behavior makes your choices transparent, accountable, and visible. And in a way, it prevents your data from being misunderstood. You're saying clearly, okay, I have decided to do this, to collect this kind of data, and the reason is this one, and makes your work visible. You're really contributing to the methodological story of your research area. So let's set the good example. And on a very pragmatic aspect, it just really helps you become more organized and kind of forces you to give a nice outfit to your data. I have already downloaded my dataset, I don't know how many times. Like, for example, now I moved to a new university, and on my work laptop, I didn't have my data yet. And I was like, oh, well, that's easy. I can just go online. Everything is very organized already, and download it. And I did this for this talk as well. So to conclude, if you have a data set, you actually already have the beginning of a publication with JOHD. The next step is to tell the story of your data, and this is going to enable others to find it, trust it, and build on this. So my final recommendation when you write a data paper or a discussion paper for JOHD is to think like both the researcher, who is responsible for the data, but also as the future reuser. So in other words, please don't give other researchers the kind of data that you would hate receiving yourself. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this was very clear and helpful, and I'm I look forward to answering your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Irene. This was brilliant. And yeah, really, really refreshing to hear your experience. So I can see there's already been a question in the chat, and I trust Sophia's gathering that one and the next ones that will come. So at this point, I think we'll move on to the Q&A part of this event, and I'm going to share my screen to just go through the questions so you have them in front of you and it's a bit easier to follow. Okay, so first question for Irene is I'm interested in discussing timelines for publishing from initial submission to publication. So you already talked a bit about that, but yeah, do you want to say more? Maybe I'll stop sharing so people can see.
Again, in my case, it was super fast. It was 3 months, and I think this is quite close to the standard timeline for JOHD. Now I also work as an editor for the journal, and I can confirm that the timeline tends to be pretty fast, usually between 3 and maximum 5 months, I guess, during holiday times and things like this. Of course, it depends on reviewer availability, but the journal really does its best to keep everything in the loop and have the paper published quickly.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I fully confirm this. I can just add that there is statistics about the journal on the About page. So if you go into About the journal and you go to Journal Statistics, you'll see the last year's so 2025 statistics. So here you see how many papers we accepted and then the time from submission to publication on average. It's been 84 days, so that's just less than 3 months. As Irene said, it can go a little bit up, particularly if we are crossing the Christmas period or holiday or summer period, etc. But yeah, we aim at being quick. Of course, that requires collaboration of authors and reviewers. So we also appreciate it if you can suggest names of reviewers that could be a good match for your manuscript. When you submit, you'll have that option to fill in a submission. So I highly encourage authors to do that because that helps the editors find good reviewers. Okay, so let me move on to the next question. I need to learn more about datasets. Overview. Okay, that's a big one. So Irene, do you want to make a start?
Sure, that's a very broad question, and well, the kind of data set that you are going to publish, well, depends on the research area you are a part of, right? So I'm a linguist, and well, you would expect my data set to be about language, right? So in this case, I had psycholinguistic variables, but maybe if you work in history of art, maybe you will have images, right? So the kind of data set that you will publish really depends on, well, what your research focus is on, right? In general, I can say that one good practice is always to have non-proprietary formats for the file so that everyone can access your data. So that's a problem, for example, if you release your data in Excel format, right? Because that's, well, belongs to Microsoft, I guess. So if you don't have Excel, you won't be able to access the data, right? So that's why usually you want to release your data in, I don't know, CSV, TXT, and other formats that are freely accessible to everyone.
Wonderful, thank you. And yeah, I don't have more to add. Obviously, it's a broad question, but we will touch on it throughout this event. Moving on to the next questions that we received before this event. Are there specific requirements or recommendations from JOHD regarding which repository we should use to archive a dataset? I'm happy to answer this, although Irene already covered that in her talk. So if you go on to the submissions tab and then repositories, Here's a list of repositories that we recommend because we know they are the page is loading. They do tick the boxes that we require. So they assign a unique identifier, persistent identifier to your data set. They are stable. They're backed by an infrastructure that ensures that they're going to preserve the data long term. And as soon as the page loads, you'll be able to see that this list includes well-known general repositories like Zenodo, Figshare, Dataverse. Particular Dataverse has a special instance for JOHD authors. So you can, you can say I'm permitting a dataset for a JOHD publication, and that goes into a special area for the Dataverse repository, Harvard Dataverse. And then we also have more specialized repositories for specific fields. So for example, Clarin is a European infrastructure consortium for language resources, and different European countries have, different nodes of the infrastructure have their own repositories. So we list, for example, the Italian one, but there are equivalent ones in other countries. So that's one example. We also have the South African SADILAR repository, again, for linguistic resources. So linguistics has been particularly active and sort of advanced as a field in setting up repositories for data sets, but obviously there are other disciplines specific repositories. I would say in general, as Irene said, make sure that your institution does not have a repository that you need to use by default, because that would be your first choice. And otherwise, you're also free to choose a different one as long as it does the job of ensuring persistent identifiers and sort of long-term data preservation. The page has not loaded yet, but here's the list that you can see. So we're going by memory. JOHD is another one. DANS, of course, S&D. So yeah, you see a description. If you are very familiar or you're responsible for a repository that isn't in this list that you'd want to get added, feel free to contact me. My contact details, by the way, are in the contact page. Here is my name, and there's also a form if you for sending a message. Okay. Another one for both of us. Does the dataset need to be publicly archived before submission, or is it acceptable to make it openly available after acceptance? Okay, so I'll start with this one. Irene, feel free to add your perspective. It's a question that does come up very regularly. So we are called the Journal of Open Humanities Data. So we do require the dataset generally to be openly available. And because the peer review process involves the reviewers also checking the data, at least for basic requirements, the datasets need to be publicly available. If there are very specific circumstances that justify not making the data available, we would at least require the reviewers to have access to it during the reviewing process. And then we also require you to make the data available in some form, as soon as possible, certainly before publication. Sometimes we've had cases when the data set could not be made available because of privacy or copyright issues. And that's something that needs to be motivated in the paper. But also there are usually ways to share at least part of the data set. Maybe it's a portion, or maybe it's just the metadata. But in the large majority of cases, we expect at least one data set to be openly available, and there needs to be very, very good reasons. If the reason is, well, the data set is not quite ready, or I'm worried that someone will steal it or something, that we can we can have a discussion. But clearly we encourage, strongly encourage open publication. Irene, do you have more to add to this? Okay. Okay, there's a question, the options versus journal policy, how the author could make the data available. So this, I guess this could refer to the licenses of the data. So there is a host of different licenses that you can choose from. There are various online resources where you can choose your license. The most used ones are the CC BY, was various subtypes licenses, and Irene mentioned the non-commercial one. We have the sort of credit, share alike. So do check what's the most appropriate choice for you. So, for example, if your funder requires a non-commercial license, choose that. The general principle for open research is be as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So always go for a license that is open as much as it's possible. And of course, crediting the author is something we all support. So, but yeah, generally there is a range of licenses. It's a whole field that it is part of the open research work. So I hope that answered it. Then we have question. I want to know how to go from Excel sheet to data set people other than me understand how to use. So this is sort of going a little bit deeper into one of the themes you've covered, Irene. So
I can say something about this. I think the go-to option instead of having an Excel file is to have a CSV file, which refers to comma-separated values. So essentially, your columns will be separated by commas. And that's a non-proprietary format. Of course, if you are in language studies and you may have commas as part of your data, right? So this might be a problem, and that's understandable. The good news is that you can modify the separator. It doesn't have to be the comma. You can also have the tab, and you can decide, essentially. So that's the one that I recommend. Instead of having Excel files, you can open the CSV file with Excel, if you happen to have that, or you can open that with programming languages like R, Python, and inspect that. So that's friendly for everyone, essentially.
Great. I have no more to add. I was just opening some pages in relation to the license question that we discussed earlier. Just very quickly, some examples of pages that allow you and to help you choose the right license. This is from the Open University. So this is a simple interface where you can answer some basic questions by your data to choose the license. And these are sort of overviews of the different licenses. Some of them were mentioned: share alike, non-derivatives, non-commercial. And here is an explanation of what each license does. Equally, this is the GitHub license selector, or you can see a longer list of licenses. So I won't go into the details, but there's lots of resources available to choose licenses. Here's a question that came from this event from Julia. So code can also be published along with data. I have some data and code from my project already spread out over different repositories and GitHub. Could I combine all of these into a publication for JOHD? Great question. And yeah, I'm happy to say, yeah, definitely. We do encourage you to share your code as well as your data. So there are journals specialized in code papers, like the Journal of Open Research Software. But it makes sense in your case and in many similar cases to bring it all together. There is no code journal for humanities specifically. So JOHD is acting as that venue for sharing research objects intended more broadly, encompassing also code. This is particularly relevant in subfields of humanities, like digital humanities, computational humanities, where making your research fully reproducible involves both giving access to code and data. Hello. And I could just say that the very first article that I published in JOHD as an author before I became editor-in-chief precisely contained a data set with, let's see if I can find it, with code as well. So just so you can get an example. This is the paper. I'm not sure if you're a linguist, but equally. So this is the data paper, and then it has a link to the repository where you can see that we had both the code here, the Python code, and also the CSV files, as Irene was mentioning, some TXT file, and also R Markdown. So that's another code script. So definitely very welcome to do that. Okay, Irene, do you have more to add to this one? So we can
that was very exhaustive.
Okay, Julia, I hope this answered your question. Feel free to follow up. Okay, another question for Irene. In your description of data papers, you mentioned that it needs to contain a humanities research object. Does this mean that if the dataset was built for other fields, like social sciences, political communication, should I try to think about potential users in the field of humanities, for example, linguistics? Great question.
Well, I guess this depends on how we define the humanities, right? Because, I mean, I think that political sciences, social sciences are part of the humanities, right? So if you have a data set about these disciplines, JOHD is a perfect venue for your research, actually. And I mean, of course, if you have interdisciplinary connections and you have ideas with respect to how your data in political sciences maybe might be useful for linguistic analysis, well, that's great. And that's super interesting, but it doesn't have to be the case, right? So I think that having a data set in those areas would be perfect for JOHD.
Yeah, I echo that, and that's Santa's question. So I do understand there is some confusion because the journal is called Journal of Open Humanities Data. And I should also say that historically there used to be a data journal called the Research Data Journal for Humanities and Social Sciences, published by Brill. I also published there as an author. And then the journal was discontinued in early 2025. They were sort of similar size for a while, and then JOHD in recent years really grew so much that it sort of has taken a little bit of that space. So we still say we cover the humanities, but we have a very broad definition of humanities. And yeah, as Irene said, if do think about broader users of your data set, because that's only going to help your case. So yeah, I highly encourage, do think that the majority of our readership is coming from the humanities. So the more you can make references to those fields, the better. But we have published data papers about data sets in political communication, for example. I see that as very closely related to humanities. Okay. Yeah, there's another question. You're welcome. Another question that I'm going to show. Do you have practical tips for checking the publishing, sharing rights levels for the raw data from the get-go? I heard some projects only publish the metadata and annotation. Is this a possibility? Okay, so it's two questions in one. So I think the first one was been partially addressed when we talked about licensing. I would say, as I said earlier, publishing the metadata of a data set is a very good thing. Sometimes it's the only thing we can publish or make available openly to everyone. because there are restrictions, there are genuinely acceptable restrictions on the data for copyright or privacy reasons, or ethical reasons. But you can also publish metadata and data. In terms of annotation, I consider that data. So if the annotation is added to your data, that's a way to enrich your data set, and that's hugely important. So yeah, don't think about publishing data as like raw data. Clearly, if you have done the work of enriching your data set with annotation, that's fantastic. So definitely, yeah, I don't know if you have more to add.
I think it really depends on what kind of data you're dealing with, right? If you have sensitive data and you cannot share the raw data, well, you have to prove your point and explain, well, I can't publish openly this data, so I will provide the metadata and potentially just an annotation scheme, and I can't provide the raw data. You really have to prove your point, right? Because JOHD ideally, well, is a venue for openly accessible data. So this doesn't mean that you can't publish a data paper, but maybe a discussion paper would be more suitable for you, right? Because in that case, you're not required to have a data set.
Great. Yeah, no, great points. And that gives me the chance to make another related point, a clarification on the distinction between data papers and discussion papers. Let me stop sharing so people can see. So data papers, as Irene said, have to be descriptions of particular research objects, data sets, what we talked about. Discussion papers can describe a data set, like Irene's example, or they can be more theoretical and not describe a specific data set. So discussion papers are a little bit more of a mixed category. I can see that Sue's question had a second part, which maybe clarifies the example she had in mind. So for web scraped publicly open data, such as social media posts, are there guidelines for sharing or copyright? Which is a hugely important question. I would say yes. Social media posts do have their own sensitivities. They, have, the handle and maybe references to the creators of the posts that we may need to preserve. It's not really in our scope to get to this level of individual support, but we do encourage authors to go through their institution's ethical process, and we do expect authors to have done that, so that you're fully confident about sharing the data, that you have the permissions to share the data that you've gathered. So if in the reviewing process we do spot potential issues, we will flag it to the authors, but we do also expect the authors to have done the background research, to have checked that they have permissions, because we, as a journal, publish data papers, not the data sets themselves. We publish data papers that contain links to the data sets, but we're not the data set publisher. So the responsibility of the copyright, etc., it relies on the author. So I do encourage you to check all the documentation from say social media APIs that you're scraping, or to make sure that you have the right permissions. I hope that answered your question, Sue. Okay, so we have two more general questions that came in. Yeah, Sue thanked, great. So let me share my screen again, people can see. If you happen to disagree with any of the reviewer's comments in your paper, what is the best way to address this in your paper revision or report of revisions done? Okay, great question. I'm very happy to answer that one. So as a general reminder, when we, as the editors, receive reviews from the reviewers, we will gather them and pass it on to the authors alongside any additional editorial comments we may have. And we do ask authors to then take into consideration those reviews, comments, in their revision of the manuscript, and also prepare a point-by-point response to each reviewer's point or comment. But as in any peer reviewing process, as an author, you are entitled to disagree with your reviewer, and then it becomes a question of how you argue your case with the editor. In the majority of cases, your response to reviewers will be assessed by the editor and will not be sent back to the reviewers. So it is really an editorial decision. In some few cases, we've had to do a second round of reviews when the comments were very sort of, involved. But generally, you need to argue a case why you disagree with that comment. It could be that addressing that comment would require so much extra work that would be out of scope of the paper. Could be that you simply don't think this would be appropriate, and then you need to explain why. And then it's the editor who will make a decision, maybe will consult other experts, or will make a decision based on their own expertise. Our editors have at least PhDs, and some of them also postdoctoral experience, or are more senior, like me, who so have seen lots of manuscripts and are, have also the scientific expertise to make an informed decision. So yes, feel free to argue your case, and then it could be that we get back to you with more discussion, or we just accept your case. Yeah, I hope that worked. And then finally, one more question that we got is to avoid desk rejection. What advice would you give to a PhD candidate who does not have access to a supportive network of colleagues or supervisors, or even who is not from an academic background and might not know some of the unspoken rules of academia? I feel like this is a really important, sensitive question that resonates with more people than we may think. I used to be outside academia for 6 years between my PhD and my first academic post, so I can fully sympathize with that feeling. Irene, did you want to give a first answer to this?
Sure. I think honestly, when it comes to JOHD, all you have to do is really check the website. Like, JOHD's website is very exhaustive, very rich. If you read carefully, you will have all the information you need to really avoid desk rejection. I can give you an example that happened to me as an editor recently. Someone had submitted a data paper, and the data paper was, I think, 10,000 words. And I was like, this person didn't even read the guidelines of the journal, right? And that's also annoying for the editor, because you kind of feel disrespected in a way, right? You have all the information available on the website. You should read them, right? So really, I don't think that when it comes to JOHD, there's any unspoken rule. Everything is very clear, transparent. You really find everything on the website.
Yeah, thank you. Great. I can only fully echo that. Maybe it's helpful to just walk people through the submission page, because many of the queries we get, or many of the rejections we make, could be avoided by looking at the submission guidelines. So if you go into submissions and how to submit, you'll see the word limit here. You also have a list of author guidelines. We have inserted a section of artificial intelligence. I'll take this opportunity to draw your attention to this one. We've had a few recent submissions where we could clearly see that the majority of the text had been generated by AI, and we do not accept that. So there is a whole section that specifies what's possible or allowed and what isn't. In general, AI can be used sort of for minor support, but we do expect authors to be authoring and the content. Particularly, we'll spot that in references that have been hallucinated. So this will clearly lead to desk rejection. So do avoid that. So the submission step-by-step list is great list to follow, and it does explain how, after you register on the system, the very second step is selecting a repository. So you can imagine there's still in many cases we have review submissions of data papers without a data set linked. So that is the first point to do, and the DOI as well. We've had quite a few submissions of data papers where the data is actually a website. Could be a database that you can query from a website, and that's great. But you do need to deposit the data set in a repository as well. And that is because a website is a dynamic entity. And we do need to freeze your data set in a version that can then be assessed by the reviewers and that can be linked to your data set, a data paper. So if, in a year's time, your website gets updated, your database, doubles in size or whatever, you make some radical changes, then if your paper were to link to that website, but were to describe an earlier version of the database, there will be a mismatch. So we do need you to deposit a frozen version of your data set in a repository, in addition to linking to the website if you want to. And then you prepare your submission with a cover letter. That's where you can request a waiver. So the journal is gold open access, and you see here in the publications fee section that as in any gold open access journal, authors or their funders are expected to pay an author publication fee or charge, APC, which is £1,070 at the moment. This is standard practice in gold open access. It means that the cost of making the article open access is given upfront to the publisher so that the article can be read for free, as opposed to being charging libraries for access to subscribed content. Now, we do fully understand that authors should not pay for this out of their own pocket. It's usually the funder who does that, or their institution. And if you don't have access to those funds, you can request a waiver in the cover letter. So here's a cover letter where you basically say, I do not have access to funds, I request a waiver. And then you might be asked to prove that you don't have access to funds, like a letter from your head of department. So there's that. And in this at this point, we also highly encourage you to suggest names of reviewers that would be a good match for your paper. And then the paper goes through the process of peer review, corrections, copy editing, and I want to take the opportunity to do a shout out to our wonderful copy editors who are volunteers like all of us, and who make a huge difference to the quality of our content. So they work with authors to make sure that the content is formally and also content-wise sort of in line with the journal standards. And then it hands over to the typesetters, who then take care of the design and the final shape of the paper. So let me close by telling you a little bit more about our online presence. If you want to follow us, there's a range of different ways to do that, depending on your taste and where you are in the world. So we have an X account here. We have Instagram, LinkedIn. So all these, by the way, are linked from our homepage. So our social media links are here. And we also have a WeChat channel for our colleagues in China. And we have a YouTube channel as well. And I particularly encourage you to use Yes, the YouTube channel, just to answer Sue's question, will the link to the recording be sent out as well, or should be located afterwards? We will post the recording on our YouTube channel. So if you bookmark this channel, you subscribe to it, you'll get notified when we upload it, upload the recording. I encourage you to use the YouTube channel as a resource, a set of resources to learn more about the journal. We will publish both the full recording and also clips of the event. So here, for example, we have, let's see, a playlist that gives you an idea. So we have the recordings of the first Open Humanities Data Forums that we held a few years ago, sort of introducing the journal. We also have some interviews, conferences, short videos if you don't have that much time. We have special collections. So these are to find out more about some of our special collections. And then this is about the celebration anniversary event that we had a year ago, or yeah, September last year, where we went through the last year, the 10 years of the journal. So you can use this channel to learn more about different aspects. So for example, peer reviewing of data papers. Here's one video about that, data paper versus traditional research paper. We also have interviews with our copy editors to find out more about the added value of our copy editors. We will be publishing interviews with our editorial board members. So yeah, if you're into learning from watching rather than reading, I encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. And then finally, we have a newsletter. So if you go onto our website, you'll have a link here to subscribe to a newsletter. You also can subscribe to it by clicking on this link. And you can also see an archive of our past newsletters here. So here's the example of the last one. So we publish these twice a year, and it's a wrap up of the different things that we've been up to. Also trying to solicit input from the community. So we're not going to bombard you, spam you with lots of emails, but it's also a good way to get updates from the journal, call for papers, our new team members, etc., etc. Yeah, I want to thank Sofia Corradino for making this event possible, for all coordinating all the work that went into making this event. We're also going to have a second session later today. So double thanks to Sofia, and thank you again, Irene, for your wonderful talk. Yeah, I hope this was useful, and I really look forward to staying in touch with all of you here joining us today, but also all those who will be watching this recording in the future. I hope this answered some of the questions you had about data papers, and you feel inspired to write your next data paper and help us sort of spread the word about data sharing. Yeah, I can see some comments in the chat thanking for this opportunity. You're very welcome. We're very happy for this worked out. So yeah, thank you. I will see you in the next event or in future videos.